would like to greet everybody. Welcome to the 2013 SSSP program. This is the first. I'd like to wish everyone Eid Mubarak, which is the end of Ramadan, just in case any of you care. This is also a happy occasion for me because my term as program chair ends. When Ricardo got elected, I thought that was great news, and he called me to tell me, and then when he asked me to be the program chair, I sort of thought that was great news, and today I'm ending, and this is also good news, and what happens in between will be in my memoirs. I have a great honor to introduce Ricardo. He was very diligent, and he gave me instructions on what I should say. But before I begin, I would like to welcome and say hello to a Danish contingent. They're right there. They came all the way from Denmark. So we are slowly making a headway into being an international organization, or at least an organization that has some international guests. But it's very important for SSSP to be international, and one of the things Ricardo has done and is doing is expanding the reach of organizations like this into Latin America and bringing them to the U.S. Ricardo got his master's degree at University of Maryland, and something I didn't know, worked 4 years as a full-time social worker, which explains both his caring attitude and his overwhelmingly controlling behavior. He did his, the British tell a joke, the difference between a social worker and a pit bull is that you have a chance of getting the child back from a pit bull. He studied... Approve that joke, please. No, it's too late, it's out. He got his PhD from Boston College doing his dissertation work by living and working 5 years in Nicaragua, studying the revolutionary period in the 1980s. There you go. Even though it's now a very religious organization, but that's another story. During that time, he was an activist in Boston, the chapter of CISPES, which is the Committee in Solidarity for the People of El Salvador. And he's part of a national organization that he co-founded in Washington in 1979. He spent 18 years teaching in Dominican University in Chicago, although I suspect they don't know that because he spent a lot of that time out of the country. He was visiting lecturer at the National University of Colombia in Bogota. He was a lecturer at University of Zacatecas in Mexico, University of Havana, and Fulbright's professor at University of Panama. He is also, I'm happy to say, the Latin American and Caribbean editor of Critical Sociology, a journal I edit, and I couldn't do it without his help. And he is also the editor of a Brill series, Critical Studies in Social Science. Critical Global Studies, which is a book series that's linked to another series we do together. He's traveled extensively throughout South and Central America, and FYI, the minute he finishes here, he's on a plane back to Bogota. He is the co-author of Latin America After the Neoliberal Debacle with co-author Jimena de la Barra, and he is the co-author or co-editor of 10 other books, numerous articles on social problems and political economy of development. He organized in Quito, Ecuador, a region-wide dialogue of Latin American social movements, NGOs, and leftist political parties for the task of helping resist hegemonic free trade agreements and build a popular alternative rooted in a solidarity-based South-South dialogue. One of the things he's very active in is sort of interregional cooperation in resistance to North American hegemony and neoliberalism. He has the results of those meetings are in a book that he edited that was published both in Peru, Chile, and Ecuador. He's the former vice president of SSSP and didn't learn any lessons in the process. He's worked for many years building scholarly ties between Cuba and the U.S. and through the Latin American Studies Association, former program chair of the Caribbean Studies Association when it met in Cartagena, and he is married to Gladys Acosta, who herself is a feminist activist, lawyer, human rights attorney, and is currently working in UNICEF, which is why he's going to Bogota, Colombia, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Ricardo Dello Buono.
Thank you, David. That was the fun part. You can't get enough. Just keep coming, And now, on top of it all, you can say that you participated in a program put together by David Ricardo. Congratulations. David Fossenfest, as you might, I think, have heard, if he didn't say, that he is the editor of Critical Sociology, the editor-in-chief. And, under his watch, we saw the journal go from where we used to sell the used copies to make the printing cost for the next journal at every conference we could get to now we have a top-tier Sage journal with 6 issues a year under his watch. And when we picked him, we knew he was good, but we didn't know he was quite that good. So, it was just so happens that he is a colleague and a friend of over 30 years. He has been a relentless critic of my work. He's been a mentor to me and, of course, a co-conspirator, which I'm very happy to claim. So I think, as David already suggested, being a program chair is largely a thankless task. He knew that it was going to be a long haul. He knew it would probably mean nothing or little to his own CV life cycle. He probably knew that it was going to impose on his home life and his life partner, Heidi, who was very busily involved in a major book project. But he did not hesitate to consent to the task. I attest to the fact there was no begging involved. And David immediately began to envision the process of putting together our 2013 program, which, you didn't notice, is over 25% larger and more complex than any other previous meeting in our 63-year history. So an applause for David. So I do want to thank all of my friends and colleagues for their support and presence here today, and also our visitors from Denmark, who we had a great meeting earlier in the summer in Aalborg. And I'll talk more about that somewhere along the line. I think that I could thank so many people, and I'm not going to because I have a lot to say. It's going to take me a long time to say it. And I can see we're in New York, it's Saturday night. Everything's not going to click well if I don't get started on my talk. So let me just thank the next 400 people. Charlotte Bunch last night, Raywin Connell and Claire Anzetti, they did a triple show. A 3-part plenary interruption that I promised we wouldn't have, but we did it in a non-traditional format, followed up by the Mall Girls, who did a fantastic performance in 2 shifts. We went to about 8:30 and most of the SSSP people's bedtime, and then the second wave came in towards the end and kicked in, the people sort of coming back from going out, and it worked out really well. Anna Alazuski from the UN's Unite Against Violence Against Women campaign showed up, and that was great to give a brief report on and how to get involved with the UN's campaign. And I want to thank my former student Laura for being so helpful, and not only so helpful in just sort of helping out and supporting me throughout this conference, but for helping me to be a teacher, teaching me to be a teacher. That's what our students do, those of us who teach. And again, I could just keep thanking people, but then it would probably mention everybody in the room. So why don't we just get on? So. Remind me to thank people later, though. Anyway. All right, so for nearly half a century, social constructionism has captured the imagination of sociologists worldwide. Its consolidated presence has been felt in social problems textbooks, dedicated book series, and within the intellectual circles of the discipline's major professional associations, particularly here in the Society for the Study of Social Problems, where many of the key constructionist authors have served as presiding officers and/or as editors of the association's journal, Social Problems. So tonight I want to suggest a critical reading of, by any stretch of the imagination, has been a positive experience. And in reality, I'm going to pay homage to social constructionism because I plan to try, at least, to offer my own natural history of the natural history approach. So I want to argue that 21st century conditions and their changes, unprecedented global crisis, is basically drawing into sharp relief the limitations of the constructionist project. And therefore, it is falling behind the curve of social change. In response to the deepening crisis of recent years, powerful and increasingly transnational social movements have emerged to challenge the real manifestations of domination in the global north and south. So the historical moment demands that we as academics, social scientists, and social practitioners work in better tandem with these popular movements, in my view. That means channeling our efforts more directly to synergize and concretize emerging strategies and visions of another possible world. For scholar activists, this requires a revitalized sociological imagination, which is to say a critical reimagination that goes beyond critical analysis per se and places renewed emphasis on collective response and strategy building, which was a great session that I attended earlier today on that issue. I'll try to come back to that. So some have argued that social constructionism was never particularly well suited for the task of engaged activism. I can mention some folks. I guess Ben Agger is probably one that came to mind. In my view, the principal defect of social constructionism is that it rests in a self-imposed political limits and its failure to adequately situate the subjective elements of analysis in the objectively real context of capitalist domination. Now, in its patched-up, eclectic phase, I believe that constructionism is losing the ability to generate new insights into confronting problems and to adequately interface with the actually existing struggles underway to transform and transcend the existing crisis. But as in the past, this opens the door for alternative approaches. And I believe that critical sociologists should seize the moment and move decisively through this opening. So let no one here doubt, sounds like Obama, that this necessary project of reimagination is as complex as it is ambitious. The challenge is to remake the subjectivistic analyses of constructionism and relink it with the material and structural elements of 21st century capitalist crises. At minimum, a critical social ontology is needed to balance the subjectivistic emphases of constructionism to the end of preserving its most salient insights and incorporating them into a more powerful synthesis of social problems inquiry. Let me know if I'm eating the microphone. I feel like I am. Thanks. So, we have to do this somehow, free of engaging in endless ontological inquiry or flooding it with an overly determined, structurally informed critique, which is to say we need to somehow, re-encapsulate the two fundamental dimensions. We definitely have to aspire, though, to replace the docile and politically useless attitude of detached reflexivity that has betrayed the spirit of Mills, in my view. It's a sleepy claim to professional respectability. Our aim should be to implant an insurgent attitude back into the discipline that accepts the necessity of structural change. Now, in many ways, the initial emergence of social constructionism was made inevitable by the implosion of the elitist and pretentious claims of structural functionalism that preceded it, the paradigm that in the mid-20th century basically dominated all of North American sociology, or a good chunk of it. During the 1960s, a flush of alternative paradigms rushed to fill the vacuum produced by functionalism's decline in fortunes. There was an accumulated hostility to positivistic sociology, which was correctly seen as atheoretical, that favored the emergence of more interpretive Verstände approaches that would eventually mature into modern constructionism. Now, particularly influential in this regard was Peter Berger and Thomas Luckman's The Social Construction of Reality in 1966. It essentially became a manifesto for nudging sociology more squarely into the realm of subjectivism. In spite of numerous theoretical virtues, Berger and Luckman's treatise uncritically, or perhaps opportunistically, asserted that the central dilemma of contemporary sociology was to seek reconciliation between the Durkheimian and Weberian traditions. Although their analysis effectively never departed from the phenomenological outlines of Husserl or the theoretical recipe and call for Schutz, basically Berger and Luckman argued for a timely insertion in the moment. That is to say, they grabbed the wave at the right place, at the right time, and they made a big hit. My first reading of Berger and Luckman's work as a college student in Westchester was roughly 8 years after it was first published in 1966, having been earlier introduced to the field as a freshman by Berger's Introduction to Sociology. I thought this new and more complex work seemed to me to be a vast extension of his debunking and a brilliant exposition of the notion that things are not what they seem. Coupled with Thomas Luckman's deep phenomenological reading of religion, it seemed like sociology now had its very own Simon and Garfunkel. Now, just a few years later, as a graduate student, I remember dialoguing with master's thesis professor George Ritzer about everything that was missing in the social construction of reality, most notably a coherent analysis of power, let alone the state. And having by then read a number of other works by Peter Berger, like A Sacred Canopy, The Homeless Mind, A Rumor of Angels, particularly Pyramids of Sacrifice, I began to appreciate how fundamentally reactionary Berger's worldview really was. Just 2 years later, in 1980, I was directly able to confirm this insight by joining a doctoral seminar in classical sociological theory with Peter Berger at Boston College. I was most impressed with Berger's rendition of Durkheim, where somehow his masterful reinterpretation made structures simply melt away into shared intersubjectivity. He had, however, absolutely no tolerance for anyone who disagreed with him. And that seems to be a particular problem in dealing with feminist critiques. To this day, my single greatest life accomplishment as a sociologist, apart from being elected your president, was to have played a supporting role in the charge led by my feminist fellow graduate students in showing Berger to the door after just 1 year at Boston College. Now, in reality, it was a mutually satisfactory resolution to the discontent, since he was being strongly courted by Boston University under the administration of John Silber. You may remember him, an unyielding reactionary, an architect of the higher education as a business paradigm that many of us still suffer under today. Silber was heading a campaign to bring in intellectual superstars to Boston University. And he was busily making room for them by purging anyone seen as a leftist. So while Silber vetoed the hiring of Herbert Marcuse over the vigorous protest of faculty and was trying everything possible to drive out Howard Zinn and others, we could go on about this story, but Peter Berger was invited in to set up an institute for the study of economic culture. So during the 80s, Berger emerges in that milieu as an avowed neoconservative and worked at the invitation of Assistant Secretary of State Elliott Abrams, helping to create intellectual symbols of justification for the genocidal Reagan foreign policy, and to also promote the early ideological consolidation of neoliberalism as a school of development. So I suspect there's some kind of connection between this theoretical sort of, debunking of Berger, of which I'm casually, of course, opportunistically employing to his own legacy at the moment, the apolitical reinterpretation of reification and dialectical analysis that he co-developed in the social construction of reality, and the eventual landing he made in the worst possible brand of right-wing politics. Now, in 86, Berger's intellectual career reaches its height as he sole authors The Capitalist Revolution, it's called, a remarkably enfeebled attempt to argue that capitalism was the only one best model for social life, human rights, and development. Now, as Berger himself points out in his own autobiography of 2011, his self-identified neo-con book was a flop for all but the libertarian subculture. Now, he blames this fact on the climate of diffuse left liberalism that had by then hardened into a repressive orthodoxy. Now, that's something like a vast left-wing conspiracy, which under his criteria pretty much includes all of us here today. So, the legacy of Berger-Luckman's treatise is indisputable. In his autographical work is called Adventures of an Accidental Sociologist. Berger himself acknowledges with characteristic modesty how it changed the way sociologists look at the world. Their paradigmatic call was for a full disengagement from structural analysis through subjective reinterpretation of patterned social behavior, along with a methodological reorientation in the direction of what most of us would recognize as Garfinkel's ethnomethods. Although in his book he misspells Garfinkel's name and holds Garfinkel in very low esteem. He doesn't speak highly of Garfinkel. Something went wrong there. But anyway, take a look at that work. Barbara Katz-Rothman wrote a review of that in Contemporary Sociology, I believe. Berger-Luckman's social construction dialectic effectively tilted the discipline towards the most radically neo-Kantian elements of Weberian interpretive sociology. Their particular twist on resolving the objectivistic-subjectivistic dichotomy proved to be seminal in paving the way towards a consolidated paradigm of social constructionism. Now, even as Berger and Luckman themselves faded from sociological prominence, their work popularized the dynamic element of pattern intersubjectivity at the expense of any necessary linkage to social structure. In essence, a fascination with the phenomenological critique denigrated the objective metabolism of social life by relegating social ontology to an exclusively subjective plane. Now, the multitude of conceptual dead ends that this has generated has been widely discussed in the literature. I want to simply emphasize here how its lopsided epistemological approach falters precisely at the critical point of paradigmatic, pragmatic, and political concerns of social movements, thereby cementing into place the reactionary edge of what later matured into social constructionism. So the immediacy of the connection between the book, The Social Construction of Reality, and consolidated social constructionism is itself a matter of debate. Now, everyone seems to acknowledge the inspiration. For example, Joel Best, I think, says very clearly it was an important inspiration to the current. But in practice, the constructionist project evolved quickly and largely without active dialogue with Berger and Luckman, who also went semi-amiably on their own respective ways, Berger and Luckman. In fact, like Simon and Garfunkel, they had basically... we thought about bringing them to Central Park and getting them back together again for sort of a brief reunion, but we did opt for them all girls this time. So the lack of dialogue between social constructionism and Berger and Luckman may be due to a number of reasons. And it's a bit speculation here, but I think that the truth is that Berger and Luckman, I believe, again, this is an assessment, I think they remain more cautiously realist than many of the orthodox constructionists who followed in their wake. I think Berger and Luckman reject, first of all, the postmodernist critique. They see their work as a defense of enlightened modernism that remains reasonably realist. That's what Berger says in his autobiography of 2011. He explicitly accuses postmodernism of hijacking their legacy and belittles the constructionist approach for its failure to grasp the nuanced existence of social facticity. And who would have thought? Amounting to what he calls, and I quote from Berger, a nihilistic recipe for disaster. Now, it was precisely Berger and Luckman's analysis that inspired this whole new generation of sociologists, many of them, of course, were already immersed in median interactionism, and I think it inspired them to climb out of social psychology and make a grab for the whole sociological pie. As interactionists were rapidly gaining currency in the field of deviance at the time, there was a strong influence in SSSP, we know, we all lived it. A second constructionist manifesto emerges in this era from Malcolm Spector and John Kitsus's 1977 work, Constructing Social Problems. It was really this work that completes the circuit, consolidating the emergence of social constructionism, as we now know it, I believe, at least, was a pathfinder, as a practical working model for social problems research. Now, Spector and Kitsus's constructionism stakes their claim on a general theory of social problems. Their natural history approach repackages and applies the world openness of human actors and the idealized objectivation process that forms the ontological linchpin of Berger and Luckman's social construction treatise, potentially, though, making anything and everything now eligible to be a social problem. Once problematic claims are being collectively made real through a dynamic Lebenswelt of protest. So, in Berger and Luckman's version, the everyday knowledge remains in focus. We now are constructing based on the part of ordinary Joe, if you will, ordinary Joe claims makers, seen in periodic conflict with the established institutionalized practices around them. So the intense theoretical dispute with which this initially precarious approach sought to contrast itself with Mertonian sociology transforms objective reality into a ghostly haunting for the constructionist project, one to be exercised from analysis at all costs. This is a fantastic, I put with PH, struggle that became substituted for the real historically ongoing ones. See, the struggle now is all in paradigm land. So we're recreating all sorts of insurmountable obstacles in social constructionism for creating a progressive alternative for the discipline, I believe, at this critical point. So the social construction of social problems was processual, clearly, just like Berger and Luckman's was dialectical, clearly, but neither were historical in a realist political economy sense. The constructionist process was now free to be delightfully filled with unrestrained human agency as a response to the establishment. It was a perfect sequel to the 1960s. Conflict theory could be selectively weaved into a societal reaction scenario, but the objective reality of structural oppression within historically defined structures was to be largely neglected, politically bracketed, if you will, so as to permit a fully, I would say, ephemeral, but presumably more reliable analysis of meanings being collectively defined as social problems. In other words, the quotes keys are about to get a real workout in sociological history. So beyond Berger's own theoretical implosion, what is to be made of his charge regarding the postmodern heist of social constructionism? Here, my graduate career at Boston College took a qualitative turn for the better. When the year after Peter Berger departed, I took a contemporary theory seminar with another brilliant theorist, this time by the name of Stephen Fold. The personality contrast with Berger could not have been greater. You all, of course, know him as our former SSSP president, but I must confess that I initially thought Stephen was a fellow graduate student. And what higher compliment to pay to an iconoclastic theorist who was also a truly brilliant educator. Berger had hung a picture of the embattled King Charles on his office wall, but Fold adorned his somewhat smaller office with a poster of The Clash. So we were all totally ready to rock the Casbah. But the euphoria quickly came crashing down when we got the assigned readings list. Now, when I look over my notes from the 1981 class, and I have to confess I do this every year because I teach contemporary theory every year, I vividly remember that a fellow classmate by the name of Javier Trevino, it sounds familiar too, it's another SSSP president I see. We were both struggling to really understand the full reach of Stephen Fold's rapidly evolving approach to social problems, because by then his legendary Social Problems article in '77, Discovery of Child Abuse, which was coterminous with Specter and Cassous, was suggesting the possibility of a more critical and power-reflexive social constructionism. So Fold was moving far more rapidly than the constructionist mainstream, and he quickly transcended the limits of social constructionism with what I call a supercharged left postmodernism. Now, this was matched only by his incredible Halloween house parties. We all have some neurons in some of that. By the time the spectacular 1992 presidential address of Stephen Fold's postmodernity as a social problem, right after the first Persian Gulf War, Berger's accusation was starting to sound a little bit prophetic. The implication was clear that social constructionism impelled critical, but if not unpredictable, outcomes for the discipline, which for me sounded like an appropriately optimistic, if not partially digested reading of Fold's earlier work on predicting dangerousness. To quote Stephen Fold's 1997 article entitled The Cybernetic Delirium of Norbert Wiener, it is the, quote, fluid, high-speed, and densely layered webs of communicatively driven positive and negative feedback which at this moment affect the ways you are receiving my words. This is a story of how the loops of cybernetic feedback are informing the energetic ritual organization of power between ourselves and others. Within the fast, flexible boundaries of global capital, the most dominant, but certainly not all, of these feedback loops carry a masculine, heterosexist, and racially inscribed charge. Now, to me, that is brilliant.
That's right.
And I think you all know it to be. So Fold's brilliant and provocative work suggested many things to many people. It's kind of strange, though, because what it suggested to me with the capital analysis was that there was a need to arc back to the materiality of what's lurking behind, the reality lurking behind social constructionist imagery. So it's precisely this avenue that I now want to pursue this evening. I am seeking to recalibrate the dynamic, processual, even sensual advances of social constructionism with a materialist analysis of 21st century capitalist structures. Again, the idea is to move beyond social constructionism by reimagining social problems in the real context of capitalist class contradictions and the actually existing struggles underway to transform and transcend them. Now, the task is to move us into deeper levels of analysis and strategy, because the crisis is not merely a symbolic object of inquiry. It's a materially discernible question of human survival. So in the decades since Specter and Kitsous, we have seen social constructionism play out this natural history of its own, first with a reach towards unsustainable orthodoxy, then towards reaccommodation with the rest of the field, supplementing conflict approaches with viral strains of postmodernism. Now, as fundamentalist constructionists would continue to rail against structural common sense, lost was how social actors construct our social realities, but do so under conditions not exactly of our choosing. So in the orthodox constructionist world, left and right politics effectively becomes homogenized. Exploitation becomes ephemerally trapped in the eyes of the beholder. Predictably, critiques of that kind of constructionism did not take long to appear. Just 1 year after Kitsous himself presided over the SSSP, Francis Fox Piven's memorable presidential address of 1980 launched a scathing critique of constructionism, demonstrating how it, quote, purged the elemental dialectic of resistance from social life. It was a very influential presidential address for me. So, an even more devastating critique, unfortunately, emerges internal to the paradigm from a 1985 social problems piece by Woolgar and Polish, again famous, in which they were infamous. They slammed orthodox social constructionism for its ontological gerrymandering, its opportunistic or selective relativism, if you're not familiar with this debate, which is to say that they show how in practice sociological constructionists get to decide who are and what are the really real, taken for granted backgrounds against which we can contrast the socially constructed constituent elements within social problems inquiry. Now, this was a particularly heavy blow to orthodox constructionists. So I'm sorry if it's a bit obtuse, but I'm going to just keep moving. I think many of us are familiar with the debate here in this room. Now, on the one level, it revealed a basic theoretical inconsistency with Specter and Kitsous' approach by showing how they exhibit notable lapses into realism while claiming to the contrary. At another level, it revealed the presence of a strident stripe of sociological elitism, of the same sort for which they had so vigorously critiqued the structural functionalists. Constructionists, after all, told us that the functionalists were claiming to be the ultimate experts in what is to be considered social problems. So as I put it in a 2004 essay, Woolgar and Polish's critique, quote, staked out social constructionism's lack of any reliable basis for the erection of conceptual firewalls within the construction of their own discourse, compelling them to be either opportunistic in the establishment of an objectivistic escape route or else burn up in the very process of their hot pursuit of subjectivistic purity. So the impact of this critique again, folks pretty sympathetic to the paradigm, were still being felt at least a decade later when Miller and Holstein's influential collection, Reconsidering Social Constructionism, offered a broad and fairly favorable balance on this emerging history of social constructionism. Now, the collection arose out of SSSP sessions in the late 80s, and at the onset, they recognized the strong influence of Kitsous in the field, and they confer upon him the label of a consistently radical constitutive voice within constructionist sociology. The great debate, though, revolves around how subjectivistic should the overall approach be if it were to sustain its own paradigmatic claims making. So the more pragmatic and best approach was, of course, taken by Joel Best in his approach, in my view, of course, was taken in his contribution to the same volume entitled, But Seriously, Folks, The Limits of the Strict Constructionist Interpretation of Social Problems. And in much of his later work, he expounded the necessary internal calibration for a more moderate, paradigmatic recipe, one that could be and should be coaxed away from epistemological debates and overextension of reach in favor of stressing modest empirical contributions to studying claims making that are compatible with co-validation through other methods. He was a pivotal, I believe, he made a pivotal contribution in marking a sustainable path for further development of this paradigm. By the way, Joel mentioned that he was unable to make it tonight. He's at the Society for the Study of Social Interaction. that right? A symbolic interaction. And so looking forward to him reading this thing, running me over with a bulldozer. So, okay, so despite this internal struggle for paradigmatic sustainability, in the face particularly of its post-orthodox variants, one overarching problem with constructionism was rarely being discussed within the ranks, namely, that the perspective remained largely trapped in political irrelevance. Now, in the end, much of social constructionism had merely succeeded, and especially orthodox social constructionism, had merely succeeded in displacing functionalist jargon with its own finely cultured, apolitically orthodox logic of inquiry. Writing at the turn of the century, Ian Hacking put it this way. He says, social constructionism initially carried excellent shock value, but it became tired. Worse yet, it became part of the discourse that it is trying to undo. So part of social constructionism's appeal, for me, and I think for many, is its processual approach in capturing the subjective complexity of human agency. But its failure to relink back to the structural constraints of political economy that in our present times of crisis seem so badly out of touch with this reality, again, is the nature, I think, of this call that I make. I say the processual world of the ahistorical claims maker who actively goes through constructing their own social problems, explicitly depoliticizes, rips social actors out of their structural context. It eerily resembles the way rational action approaches do the same operation, but in the contrary case of in this case, harmonizing the human actor with some neoliberal imagination of human nature and some kind of construct of homo economicus. I believe that social constructionism is likewise freezing the historical moment of the larger political economy in a way that takes our eyes off the moving ball, which was kind of a famous line of a Wallerstein talk one year at the ASA. So I think that Fole offers a more optimistic reading from his vantage point when he portrayed constructionism as a historically pivotal development in opening up the space for radical inquiry, in this case in the Foucauldian tradition. Now, according to Fole, and I quote, the social constructionist perspective carved out a conceptual space for a radical reading and writing of social problems as nothing but the cultural, political, and material effects of the human struggle for the organization of power. Within the power and in history. So within this space, we are invited to imagine that those things we experience, define and react as problematic, are in fact never independent of the differentiating social practices which produce them. There's a lot there, but I think you get the drift. So I take this as a literal invitation, and I propose that a critical approach that privileges the centrality of human praxis as situated within these historically defined relations. In this case, I would believe that would include an analysis of the larger political economy is where we need to go. As scholar activists in the field, I don't mean to be putting words in Stephen's mouth that this is what he's saying we should do. I'm saying that I get this out of what he's saying, that I believe that this is what we should do, we being scholar activists. So as scholar activists, I believe we need something to the left of social constructionism, but also something more concrete and realist than left postmodernism. This kind of approach can begin with a very basic dialectical model sensitive to addressing the objectivistic and subjectivistic elements of social change. The aim is to help recalibrate the discipline's capability for closing ranks with 21st century social movement militancies, and at the same time close the gap with the kind of critical sociology being practiced in many parts of the global South. So I'll talk about the importance of this dialectical view, which again, ironically, was being discussed earlier today in the context of structural analysis of racism. So even as Berger and Luckman were keen to appreciate, the dialectical approach stresses the dynamic and processual nature of all things. This is even more essential for an approach which privileges activism and deliberate social change. As Georgi Lukács, the great Hungarian Marxist philosopher, so eloquently put it, it was Hegel who first pointed the way forward in asserting the necessity of attaching greater ontological weight to becoming rather than being. So re-examining the legacy of Lukács is particularly important in my view, given his close contact with Max Weber, which forced him early on to confront the subjectivist dilemma from a more politicized Marxist point of view. Weber's mission, after all, was to free up the Germanic social sciences from its crippling epistemological disputes, the Methodisch type thing, in order to re-emerge as a respectable social science worthy of the German tradition. But Lukács was trying to preserve the critical bite of Hegelian dialectics within Marxism for the purpose of better comprehending social change and informing social transformation. So we've got two very different agendas. In political sociology, the work of Lukács is most widely known as an early critic of dogmatic versions of dialectical materialism, the kernel of which is probably familiar to most of us in his famous book, History and Class Consciousness of 1923, his early work. It was here that Lukács' critique of Weber strongly influenced, however, the evolution of his later thinking, and together with the work of Gramsci, would come to provide a powerful impetus for spawning neo-Marxist currents that we're familiar with, including, of course, the Frankfurt School. Now, recent studies of Lukács have paid greater attention to his later work, in which he continued to develop and deepen his analysis of social ontology. I've gotten a lot more interested in that work lately. Lukács was aware of the necessity to confront the question of ontology in any coherent theorizing of emancipation. And so he effectively dedicated his final years to elaborating, again, what he's calling an ontology of social being. His lifelong concern, right up to 1971, the year of his death, was to keep intact the Marxian dialectical formulation in which human praxis is the sole source of emancipatory social change. Now, Lukács always paid considerable attention to Marx's philosophic encounter with Hegel. The principal defect, of course, says Lukács, of the Hegelian mindset was Hegel's own insistence on the methodological priority of logic in his system, something that sealed the fate of the capital S system that would so recklessly be posed as the end of philosophy by the master Hegel. So in contemporary terms, this was akin to neoliberal dialogues declaring an end of history, precisely at the historical moment when the neoliberal project was beginning to become englued under the weight of its own structural contradictions. That's my analogy. From Lukács' point of view, Hegel's dialectical method ultimately achieves its full sociological significance within the development of Marxian social thought, only to be suppressed later by two great waves of reactionary thinking. The first would occur within the resurrection of an epistemological status quo ante, as popularized in various forms of neo-Kantianism, and that, of course, was most notably popularized by his friend Max Weber. It was also less successfully, but even more conservatively, postulated by the phenomenological sociology of Alfred Schutz. The other wave, however, the other setback wave, was associated with the fate of social sciences under Stalinism, with a very clumsy, stagnant, opportunistic version of dialectical materialism, which basically suffocated the critical edge to Marxism. So for Lukács, the ontology of contradictory social processes is the salient form of a unified social whole, offering a complexity that lends itself towards critique and social transformation. The totality of a social problem is therefore constituted. The totality of a social problem is therefore constituted by the dynamic interconnections of historically particular elemental moments. In this case, the epistemological necessity that emerges is clear. If social reality itself is invariably the result of a dynamic process, this reality can only be grasped by an equally dynamic processual approach. So as Lukács points out, one of the authors most famous to have grasped this early on, of course, was Lenin in his philosophical notebooks. Many people have been sort of fascinated by the way that Lenin sort of took time out to go back and reading Hegel and doing his philosophical notebooks. Writings, and his epistemological writings, he basically looked at Hegel as this kind of theory of knowledge in addition to a theory of social transformation. So for Lukács, the central unifying category that emerges is one of praxis, and a sociology rooted in praxis is not a theory of how to manage contradictions. It's rather one in which irresolvable contradictions can be seen as unfolding in history and generating an emancipatory dynamic of social change, which are constantly aiming at some form of resolution. So the political and strategic significance of this approach derives from how human participants can step back, analyze, and reinsert themselves in this history in a more conscious fashion, capable of favorably altering its course. And that summarizes the Lukács project, that one line. So as Gramsci puts the same idea, praxis is where understanding is inextricably integrated with activism and with politics and with making history. Now, fast forwarding to the present, much of the legwork and gleaning, I think, these seminal insights of Lukács have already been accomplished in the work of another Hungarian critical theorist, István Mészáros. Mészáros was a former student of Lukács and in recent years has emerged as a leading Marxist theoretician of social transformation. Mészáros has steadily broken new ground in exploring the contours of transformational social change while remaining acutely sensitive to the structural limits imposed by global capital. Hugo Chavez, as you see there, cited Mészáros as a major theoretical inspiration for the creation of 21st century socialism, in which the line of strategy builds a structural analysis around the political requirements of revolutionary transformation. So in this complex sort of theorizing, we find, I believe, better prototypes of envisioning how the social construction of reality can be replaced with reimagining the reality of social construction. This is accomplished through an analysis of the existing set of mediations that allows for the systemic reproduction of global capital. Gramsci and others have argued any construction of a counter-hegemonic set of mediations must by real necessity emerge out of ongoing practices of resistance and struggle. Following this theoretical tradition from Lukács and Gramsci to Mészáros, the active engagement of practical activity designed to resist, dismantle, and transform exploitative structures into proto-humanistic ones requires a unified grasp of objective and subjective dynamics that have invariably proved elusive in popular emancipatory projects. In recent volumes, Mészáros distinguishes between what he calls first and second order mediations. Second order mediations under capitalism essentially consist of alienated practices in the Marxist sense, involving an inevitably hierarchical practice of appropriation of the product of producers under conditions of structural relations of production. Some dynamic degree of control over the laborers is exerted. First-order mediations, in contrast, consist of all those principles of coordination that indispensably provide for reproduction of productive relations in a systemic configuration. Mészáros seeks to pull back onto the playing field all those principles that are generally kept hidden by the capitalist system, whether attributable to inherent qualities of the human condition or functional prerequisites of modern industrial production. In political terms, the empowerment of unwilling systemic participants in their collective self-exploitation requires exposing the nerves of that system's ongoing reproductive mechanisms. Now, in short, his analysis is obviously materialist. The punchline, seems to me, is sufficiently expansive to encompass the terrain more ephemerally and familiarly discussed in the power analyses of left postmodernists. Now, it's here that Mészáros' critique of Lukács is instructive. Lukács aimed to reunite the subjective and objective aspects of capitalist crisis, and this meant transcending the subjective alienation of the worker from his objectified conditions in wage labor. This total reconciliation of the subject and object has, of course, never existed in history, and it is very doubtful that it ever could, argues Mészáros. But what is possible and necessary is the reconstitution of the creative human laborer in unity with the objective relations that require a continual exercise of that creativity and conscious control in production, rather than with those that must suppress it in order to achieve their reproduction in a class structure. So in this sense, Lukács, argues Mészáros, Lukács was inhibited through his inability to fully disengage from the Weberian neo-Kantian conception of human subjectivity, which I argue remains predominant in much of progressive sociology today, what we call critical sociology or critical Weberian theory. So Mészáros provides an additional critical element for reimagining social problems via a praxis-centered approach, and namely I refer here to the active pursuit of self-critique. The ongoing attempt to unite theory and practice requires, he argues, continual confrontation with envisioned goals and concrete achievements, theoretically informed strategy and practical results. In a context of consciously intended social transformation, the creative dedication to emancipatory struggle must be continually re-examined, assessed, and reformulated in accordance with the enabling possibility presented by the larger social movement. or movement makes a decisive entry here. Now, as Mazzaros insightfully argues in 2010, in view of the structural crisis of the capital system in its entirety, the conflict in question is structural and not conjunctural, which is to say that the magnitude of the stakes involved could not be greater. Only the historical viable institution and consolidation of a hegemonic alternative to capital's ever more destructive, socially reproductive order can offer a way out of our deepening structural crisis. So Mazzaros insists on retaining a radically different imaginary of human social relations, present in dialectical analysis, the only practical alternative to walking what he considers to be the theoretical gangplank into a terminal Weberian cynicism. Now, on this point, the Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek comes to a similar conclusion when he grapples with the uncomfortable reality of which confronts all of us, this notion of structural necessity. What if, he asks, this is Žižek talking, what if, he asks, unequal health care is as structurally necessary to globalized capitalism as unemployment, racism, patriarchy, homophobia, and so on? If we then envision social problems as somehow solvable within a context of their ascertainable structural necessity, then we're the utopians, not the Marxists. So, unlike Mazzaros, Žižek is a master of one-liners. One of his most widely quoted is, "I am utterly pessimistic about the future, about the possibility of an emancipated communist society. But that doesn't mean I don't want to imagine it." Or, as he stated to an Occupy Wall Street crowd here in Zuccotti Park in 2011, the only way we're communist is that we care about the commons. So Žižek's, excursus into Lacanian logic, if you're familiar with his work, ironically offers important elements of critique of postmodernist thought. Foucault argues, for example, that power by its nature implies resistance. But theorizing exactly how power in practice actually shapes its resistances is, we believe, the weak spot in left postmodernism. The end results are often very pessimistic and sometimes outright reactionary because they tend towards delegitimation of any actual manifestation of an emancipatory project. Now, Žižek quips, "It is far easier for us to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism." So, from this vantage point, we assert that there is a need for a critical dialectical approach aimed at fueling I'm going to start moving faster here. I realize I'm Saturday night in New York City. This is dangerous. From this vantage point, we assert the need for a critical dialectical approach aimed at fueling praxis as an alternative for moving beyond social constructionism towards the reconstruction of the sociology of social problems. Emancipation is no longer some future apocalyptic event, but rather, as Gramsci argued, a process of struggle, where problems are confronted through praxis, at first as difference, then as antagonism and autonomy, and finally through the destruction of the forms and forces which it counters and which counter it. In this view, the future is already contained in the present. It's contained as a process, not as an event, and it is a contradictory presence. Problems are resolved as new problems arise, in other words, driven by an underlying systemic contradiction of the larger system. And we should remember how C. Wright Mills was sharply critical of the so-called social pathologists, as he wrote concerning the texts of social problems, in which the fragmentary way that we looked at scattered problems, not focusing on larger stratification, failed to consider whether or not certain groups or individuals caught in these situations can possibly obtain their current goals without drastic shifts in the basic institutions which channel and promote them. So whenever you sound like a crazy person, go back to Mills, repeat what Mills says. So today in the deep throes of global, when we talk about these famous one-liners, we look at Salvador Dali says the only difference between me and a madman is that I am not mad. So today in the deep throes of global crisis, Mazzaros echoes and qualifies this basic kind of line of logic here when he states, every set of historical social relations establishes certain structural limits by which it is impossible to go beyond without disrupting the ongoing reproduction of those social relations in a social, metabolic, self-expanding process. Now, this observation foretells the mass mobilizations that are breaking out all around the globe as capital bumps up against its limits, including very notably its absolute ecological limits. In his Structural Crisis of Capitalism, Nazaros quotes Chavez as saying, I believe it's not for us to speak in terms of future centuries. We have no time to waste. The challenge is to save the conditions to life on this planet, to save the human species, to change the course of history, to change the world. This kind of social change emerges, we can say conceptually, out of the interstitial spaces of structural dilemmas that cannot be resolved within capitalist practice. Radical solutions to problems can only grow out of an empowered praxis that actively engages and defies the structural regime with a strategic and decidedly emancipatory agenda. Okay, so what does a working sociological model look like? We come to understand social problems as historical processes, which are part of a larger, really existing set of structural totalities. The built-in conflictual dynamic of social problems ultimately revolves around the organized resistance to asymmetrical power relations and state policies employed as responses to political economic crises. These help to create and shape public issues. Social movement responses to these public issues, in turn, help shapes the overall development of this changing social problem matrix. A dialectical method for the study of social problems requires us to contextualize in the structurally defined moments of social problem development, to analyze the interrelationships of social problems processes, study the specific bases for social conflicts surrounding emergent problems, and identify state policy responses to public issues as well as social movement reactions, all contributory components of social problems. I would argue this is not all that far from what a social worker does in the field, by the way. You confront those issues because you're trying to figure out how, possibly on the front line, you can mount a strategy and the real concrete possibilities of your 35-person caseload. And, you make a mistake and you know what happens. So logically, the ongoing transformations in global political economy, accordingly, imply the need for transforming the way we engage in activist practice, including, again, social work and academic practice. This is because the shifting focal points of structured oppression suggests corresponding shifts in the focal points of resistance. And if the dialectical approach tells us anything, it is that we must remain perpetually connected with the basis of social resistance if we are to favorably impact the process of social change. In seeking to grasp the totality of this process under study, a dialectical approach focuses, again, on the interrelationships of its parts as they evolve over time. Recognizing the building conflictual nature of things as an expression of an inherently temporary, unstable, and changing social process. The various kinds of state processes and responses to social problems remains a focal point for analysis. We need to remain mindful of the key role that the state plays in reproducing the existing set of social relations of everyday life and perpetuating the unequal distribution of social power and wealth by consequence. So at the same time, a dialectical approach considers the impact that social movement praxis has upon state remedies put forward to address social problems. This state movement response helps condition the overall development of the problem and the state. So the working model I promised began to develop in the critical sociology of Bill Chambliss, who presented us with an explicit dialectical approach to social problems. It was derived, as you know, from his seminal approach to conflict approach to lawmaking. His view of the state as reproducing capitalist social relations while aiming to retain its legitimacy suggested the essential need for a critical sociology of law. This model was further explored and extended by a whole generation of critical criminologists and sociologists of law, including Kitty Calavita's work on immigration, Marjorie Zatz on legality and socialism, Kate Stout on Katrina Reconstruction, just to mention a few folks in that long genealogy of thinkers coming out of the Chamblisian tradition. So following this general line of approach, I co-edited a volume with Stout and Chambliss in 2004 that included a selection of articles previously published in Social Problems. This formed part of the SSSP presidential series, and our aim was to explore the limits of social constructionism, illustrating how the contemporary intersection approaches, new social movements theories, could all work in tandem with labor, human rights, and globalization studies to produce a more praxis and social change-oriented paradigm for the field. We also sought to stress that much of this work was already being done within the SSSP. So a quick anecdote. Since this was a SSSP presidential volume, it needed to go through a dedicated committee peer review process. And when the decision came back, it was positive to go forward with the collection, but it was approved with one fairly petty gatekeeping caveat. Gatekeeping caveat. Does that sound okay? Namely, that we would be required to omit the proposed subtitle of the volume, which was Moving Beyond Constructionism. So in case you were wondering where the inspiration came from this year, for the theme, it was from that sort of touchy moment. So anyway, in our own contributions to the volume, we advocated a critical structural contradictions model that was rooted in global political economy. It was modified by inputs from a critical sociology of law and social movements theory. We simply wanted to spell out what we felt were some of the paradigmatic limitations of mainstream constructionism and its inability to adequately conceptualize the relationship between the legal order, state, and social movements in an era of rapidly changing, globalized capitalist development. In this light, the theoretical challenges of constructing a critical sociological framework revolved around the need to nestle social problems as they develop and emerge from within the larger and historically evolving political economy. Now, in a global capitalist economy, this amounts to a supra-macro context of accumulation crisis. I imagine we're on yellow slide number 1. So as capital drives to continually expand, its efforts are contradictory and tend towards crises. There's supposed to be a dynamic moment there, going like this. Okay. So the recurrent crises cannot be decisively resolved, but they are putatively suppressed through periodic economic reorganizations. The shift towards neoliberalism beginning in the 1970s is a major contextual illustration of this dynamic, the motion of which continues to have a cascading impact upon social problems worldwide. State policies, that's yellow slide number 2, respond to the recurring crises of the larger political economy with an eye on reproducing an expansive accumulation of capital while struggling to maintain its legitimacy. But if examined at critical historical junctures, it can clearly be seen that this interplay between organized social protest and the state, in turn, shapes the strategic directions of state policymaking. So there is an urgent need to account for the impact of organized social movement resistance in this model on the part of the dominant political and economic logic. That would be yellow slide number 3. So as Kate Stout argues, social movements, be they progressive or reactionary, are essentially organized expressions of resistance generated in response to social contradictions, which attempt to mediate contradictory social forces. Organized resistance, as a product of such dynamics, tends to unfold at uneven rhythms and contain only the potential for unity and effectively coordinated actions. I didn't put the quotes, but that's a direct quote. So, to the extent that social movement activities creates critical activities for the state in its ongoing reproduction of the political economy, they ultimately challenge the organization of capitalist production and constitute a visible manifestation of fundamentally underlying contradictions. This suggests a study of the legal limits of protest, and state attempts to regulate social movement activities can provide critical insights into social change. Chambliss and others in his tradition have demonstrated a critical sociology of law can illuminate the interrelationships between the state and social movements as they are effectively mediated through ongoing legal processes. Law can serve as one instrument of mediation that provides the state with the formal means for negotiating ongoing social conflicts with legal processes. They range from co-optation to criminalization of dissent. Now, the paradigmatic assimilation of these critical insights in a dialectical model strengthens our overall approach to social problems, I believe, viewed as a multi-layered social process with built-in moments of conflictual dynamics. That would be yellow slide 4. So, if you could see then, the 3 previous moments are now part of the larger grand moment, if you will, and if you just imagine in each of these 3 locations, objectivation, externalization, internalization. We're looking at Berger and Luckman again, but it's been flipped upside down. So we've gone back to a sort of a more objectivist hegemony, but the structural dynamic is built in, I allege, just as Berger and Luckman alleged to the contrary. So since social movements by their very nature seek to bring about social change, they embody the challenge to the status quo of existing state policies. The pioneering work of Stephen Barkan, for example, creatively explored the conditions under which the legal system can serve as an effective deterrent, or conversely, can prove to be a resource, that can support the goals of social protest movements and resource mobilization, approaches of the more critical edge made lots of headway in that direction. This has particular relevance for analysis in those cases where progressive or revolutionary states are in power, I might add, and when they're engaged in the pursuit of an emancipatory agenda. There's this big debate going on in Latin America right now between the vice president of Bolivia, Alvaro Garcia Linera, and Raul Jabecky. Raul Jabecky is an Uruguayan theorist, and the big debate is exactly how social movements can remain militant social actors, pushing the emancipatory process further in the context, of course, of the structural limitations that confront it. Most recently, the Colombian theorist Leopoldo Munera, in a conversation with Tony Negri, have jumped into this debate, and I'm hoping to rejoin it next week, if I'm still alive tomorrow. So what is clear about the nature and extent of social change resulting from the dynamic interplay between social movement praxis and the state can vary considerably. As state policies are challenged by social movement protest, their legitimacy is called into question, and sooner or later, a state response is drawn in order to mitigate a larger political challenge. Repressive measures by governmental agents may destroy the movement, or in effect, result in further movement growth, again, as Gamson suggests, and I think the completely unexpected by many social revolutions that are taking place, particularly in the Arab Spring, sort of illustrate this point nicely. The organized appropriation of digitalized mass media by state and social movements all form part of an unfolding power play that shapes the outcomes of social problems and social change. There's no question in my mind that social constructionist work, and especially postmodernist insights, obviously have much to offer us in this analysis. So as an entity with variable degrees of legitimacy empowered with the use of force, the state wields the power to harass, criminalize, imprison, and otherwise impose constraints on social movement efforts. But they can also choose to orchestrate the media, just like capital does, or increasingly as social movements are doing. And they can even advertise, like state advertising around particularly some of the issues I'd like to end with are becoming very acute right now in Latin America. Investing big money and high visibility media spots to make the state's case against the social movement challenge. So events over recent years suggest that legal and human rights protections for immigrants and refugees have experienced, as you know, serious setbacks as economic crises and the anti-terrorist state security policies have combined. And this has fueled a nativist anti-immigrant sentiment, not to mention bouts of war hysteria. So what is clear is that a focus on the processes of contention purely from an organizational perspective would invariably, absolutely remain incapable of fully grasping the larger social dialectic that is unfolding. There is a need to move beyond the analysis of organizational and political process to capture the objective as well as subjective fields, along with the contradictory forces of the larger political economy in which these conflicts are situated. I promise to try not to repeat that again. So now, to move towards ending, some brief reflections on how some of these can sort of play out in maybe empirical cases. As I mentioned, I believe, earlier in the summer, I gave a keynote presentation in Denmark at the 3rd International Conference in Sociology and Social Work, where I argued for a dialectical approach of the sort already being mentioned. I chose to reflect on immigration reform issues and argued that we could benefit from keeping our eye on the moving ball of the larger political economy in analyzing the challenges facing migrants and their friction-filled integration even in the most hospitable of circumstances, such as the Nordic welfare state. Interestingly, a praxis-oriented dialectical approach to the tradition of client empowerment is much further developed within radical social work. In that tradition, rather than many fields of sociology, or many national fields of sociology. So I choose to reflect on this approach as a way of interfacing with social work practice at the community level. In that talk I gave in Denmark. So briefly, the Nordic, I'm not going to give the whole talk, I promise. The Nordic social welfare state is legendary for us, because nowhere has capitalism developed a more comprehensive approach to welfare. based on the institutionalization of universal social rights with values of solidarity that enjoy a broad public consensus of support. So while the state assumes great responsibility within this context for efficient and equitable provision of essential social services, an underlying premise of the model can be seen in its historic and symbiotic development alongside a collectively negotiated and highly regulated social contract that rests upon a well-developed infrastructure of social development. It's as good as it gets in capitalism, I'm sorry. So I try to be mindful that non-Nordic researchers like most of us are wildly prone to romanticize these achievements of the Nordic welfare state, since it contrasts so favorably with the poorly administered, badly underfunded, and often dysfunctional welfare institutions that precariously prevail here in the States. So a critical inspection of the Nordic model, nevertheless, does suggest its underlying contradiction, and it points to the fault lines of vulnerability to its envisioned solidarity and sustainability, particularly in times of crisis. So as the violent May 2013 events in Sweden seem to suggest, the challenges was taking place just prior to the conference. The challenges facing the rapid growth of immigrant communities are formidable. The variable access that has become structured into the Nordic social service delivery system can conspire with the particular circumstances posed by immigration-driven dynamics to pose the fiscal and political challenges to the Nordic model. The articulated logic of the Nordic model has cultivated a high degree of legitimacy, but again, one rooted in a historically defined cultural context that traditionally displayed relatively strong homogeneity and where the kinds of disparities experienced in most parts of the world have been integrally contained and regulated. So Brockman and Hagelin suggest in their recent work that significant differences exist within the post-World War II patterns of immigration in the Nordic countries, with immigration to Sweden generally greater than in Denmark and Norway. We have the consolidation of the Nordic labor market through the migratory reforms of the 1950s, readily facilitating intra-Nordic immigration. Non-Nordic migrants, of course, predictably pose a far more explosive challenge in the current context of a prolonged global economic crisis. During the 1970s crisis, Norway became a preferred destination for Pakistani immigrants, while Turkey became an important source country feeder for Denmark. So subsequent waves of family unification-based immigration then were supplementing, and by the 2004 extension of the European Union, we have, again, waves of now migrants from the Balkans, later Iraq, from the conflict, a steady flow from Asia. Sweden's population basically ends up 1/5 immigrant or children of immigrants. Denmark's somewhat more restricted, roughly half that. Norway is somewhere in between. Just like in the U.S. and in other countries, the disadvantage that immigrants have in the labor market presents a markedly significant challenge for the institutions of social welfare. This is obvious. The rhythm of these challenges, however, is greatly conditioned by the structural linkages that Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, to take those three cases, each have with respect to the global economy. For example, Norway, is an important primary commodity producer, a big oil producer, which differs from Sweden's more intensive production of industrial goods, or Denmark's, which privileges the smaller, scale industry, agricultural goods production. These differences in the political economy context basically, again, pose a certain kind of, context that we need to take into consideration. I'm getting all the signs of time. Time is not on my side. Time has come today. So, I will suggest that the expansion and consolidation of the Nordic welfare state of the 1960s, which was closely intertwined with national identity, contrasts markedly with the structural pressure now being placed on that model by the global crisis being experienced a half-century later. Now, it's making immigration a highly public social problem for the Nordic countries and the rest of Europe, just as it is, of course, for US and Canada. Conservative forces like the Danish People's Party have brought the immigration debate squarely into the electoral arena, such as the way that the US Republican Party and Tea Party forces spin this larger discussion of immigration squarely into a debate on fiscal and social welfare spending. So when the executive agents of global capital made a strategic and tactical move into the neoliberal mode in an effort to continue its expansion, they moved quickly and loudly to rebrand social welfare spending as a structural roadblock rather than a prerequisite to stable growth, as it was seen in the preceding period. Bathed in the glow of this ideological shift, immigration was recast as a social problem that deeply contradicted the social welfare state in virtually all countries where it becomes an issue of contention, reviving the famous debate, if you will, between welfare as solidarity versus welfare as control. Immigration reform itself is a product of the global recession of the 1970s. And the emergence of the social problem of immigration in the Nordic countries is tightly intertwined with the dynamics of these upturns and downturns, just as it is elsewhere now and in earlier periods, as shown in the work of Calavita, for example. Legislated restrictions on immigration in all of the Nordic countries are ostensibly aimed to preserve the integrity of that welfare state, and while keeping its access open to foreign laborers. That structural need for access to foreign laborers, of course, is the driving force. So similarly, in the United States, the contradictory legal reforms to criminalize the provision of public services to undocumented immigrants, while periodically relaxing restrictions and legalizing the status of laborers, demanded for agricultural and highly segmented labor tasks, presents community workers with enormous challenges in ensuring the human rights of those caught up in these structured migratory pulls and pushes of the larger geo-economy. So, neoliberal capitalism has clearly altered the structural limits of social welfare spending and the public perceptions of the welfare state as we know it. This in turn changes how social welfare practitioners operate and how they are viewed by others, including their clients. The stigmatization of the welfare state as the problem, as Ronald Reagan so fondly termed it, presents new challenges for the legitimacy of the state. As Chambliss emphasized, states must simultaneously legitimate their own rule, just as they fulfill their role in reproducing capitalist expansion. Now, when the state seeks to lessen its social spending burden out of economic necessity, it must seek new forms of legitimacy, since capitalism lacks the ability to legitimate itself. As Corey Blatt argues, a critical Polanyian interpretation shows the state as a mediator of a double movement in which the state must manage the pressures created by the structural articulation of national economies in the global order, while at the same time must manage the popular resistance that accrues along of increasing social inequalities and the state retreat from its social welfare responsibilities. Blatt argues that the turn to nationalist political rhetoric forms the basis for a new public legitimating consensus, and this is one compatible with more restrictive, selective notions of rights and an economic apartheid that allocates goods and services in highly segmented ways that frequently obtains a racialized and gendered character. So now in the Nordic context, this might all seem unreal. How could this happen? National identity so wrapped around the welfare state, but indeed, in this structural context, I think we see the beginning of the resegregation of human rights that has already revealed itself to be a time bomb capable of exploding in Stockholm, as we saw, just as earlier in Tottenham, Paris, and elsewhere, to varying degrees and extents. Okay, I'm going to fly through the rest, I promise. So, my time's way over. While it's tempting to view the current crisis as a conjunctural one, Mazaros insists that we are in the very same structural crisis that began in the early 1970s. His notion of a structural crisis is when the system no longer permits its own social metabolic reproduction, an analysis that he first applied early on to the Soviet system. So if the structural analysis of theorists like Mazaros and Blatt suggests that growing disparities may be the inevitable outcome of capital's reproduction on a global scale, social movement resistance must be made aware of this dynamic and form its strategies accordingly. And I go on to suggest how social movements could perhaps then proceed to try to build upon these insights. I'm sorry, my time is wrapping. So let me try to fold it. Let me just fold it. I wanted to talk a bit about, as you see, the national student strikes. I'll suggest to you that you have here, again, in the field of education, a clear relationship where the educational system responds to evolving structural constraints upon national economies, the installation of neoliberalism, and particularly in a southern, if you will, a global south context. You have the situation where the educational structure is it's privatized. It becomes a policy of efficiency, sometimes talking about expanding coverage, all exactly the opposite of what it actually results in. And you have, of course, as a result,
this series of responses of social movements. Very powerful movements, increasingly transnational movements. They're talking to each other. Again, part of where I want to end, and I'll just sort of do a quickie. If you just go to one more slide, that's the end of it? Let's just try one more. There we go. So there was a national university strike in Colombia where you basically had a very large movement quickly develop as a result of Colombia having recently entered into a free trade agreement with the United States. Just right on schedule, 6 months later, the government's announcing a major reform of the educational system, basically designed to eliminate public education. Now, having taught in Colombia on 2 different occasions for an academic year, I can tell you that the students were well advised as to where this was supposed to go. I don't claim credit for the strike. However, I do know the major strike leaders, having met and talked with them, and I can tell you that they sort of saw it coming as soon as the free trade agreement finally got approved, and you know who approved it. You know how that free trade agreement would never have gotten approved by a Republican administration, just like NAFTA. The free trade agreement, United States, Colombia, was signed by Obama. The Democrats always opposed it, but with a Democratic president in office, they're able to put together a coalition with the entire Republican Party to put these free trade agreements into effect. A free trade agreement neoliberalizes a southern cone country, basically puts them in a situation where the need for structural reform is taken out of the citizens' control and put in the control of the operative state. And the response is that the situation blows up. Now again, this is just tracing out some of the linkages of what I believe a dialectical approach somehow, first of all, analyzes, secondly, informs social movements, and third, lets social movements kind of feel like they're going where they're going in the right direction, as opposed to just sort of like, striking out and saying they're our enemy, or the private universities are our enemy. In this case, the strike that took place in Colombia was so massive, so convincing, that although the government refused to even talk to the students at first, basically when the students took Bogota, closed down some of the main arteries, most of the private universities joined in the national strike. The government ate crow and said, we're ready to negotiate. And they came to the table. And they're currently working out that negotiation, like we continue to see in Chile. So in Puerto Rico, you see every context is completely different. The colonial context of Puerto Rico as opposed to the highly neoliberalized advanced state of Chile relative to Colombia, which was very late and less involved in the neoliberal project, is all a kind of a contextual force which helps us explain how these social movements take the character that they do and the possibilities that they can somehow maneuver in a differential way. So I'll end on that note. Thank you very much. I won't say what I'm going to say. It's just
he still has plenty
too dark.
It's too dark. Open the question. Any questions or?
Shoot, please. Let's take some. Let's try to focus on some critical ones. Yes.
In the Philippines and in Asia, there is also a strong student movement, and it is also in alliance with other groups, labor movements, peasant movement, and so when students come and strike and have demonstrations, all the others are also there. My question is, because we are also organizing, we are trying to also have alliance with Mexico, we have an organizer there in Mexico, and we are trying to organize migrants, immigrants here, but also in the Philippines we are doing that. How can we, and I'm trying really because I want to set up an institute for Philippine studies in the Asia Pacific, and this is our goal. How can we globalize and transnationalize our struggles and at the same time inform by theories and social movements that we continually criticize, and at the same time also to hear the voices of social movement actors as repositories of knowledge and producers of knowledge.
Yeah, no, I mean, nowhere like the Philippines has the women's movement shown a dynamic force capable of real structural transformation. So the question is how to build stronger regional networks and global transnational networks. And interregional, exactly. And so, that is the political question. The kind of thing that I was working in Latin America was basically around this issue of, the United States attempted to impose a region-wide, the entire hemisphere would be part of one big NAFTA agreement, a hegemonic relationship where the United States would basically dictate their fiscal policy and essentially take out of ordinary citizens the decision-making power associated with the fundamental economic levers. And, of course, social movement resistance stopped that project. Ultimately, a bit of a geopolitical analysis, the social movements of Brazil was really slamming the brakes ultimately. Without Brazil, you couldn't cut a deal with the whole hemisphere, and the U.S. had to back up. But that transnational mobilization that was able to really develop in the 1990s into 2000, and particularly 2005, where it finally came to a head, put the brakes on that project. Now, the U.S. is going into this kind of bilateral free trade agreement stuff now with Colombia and Peru and others, but it was showing how the power of social movements can directly intercede in social change. And we do have to give out awards, and I'm really looking forward to it, I promise. Does anybody else want to? Yes, we need, I know. Another comment, please? Could somebody just throw me a critical line, please? Yes. To be perfectly honest, I think it's the wrong question to ask, but I'm going to take it. I just want to say I do think that part of the academic exercise of social constructionism was to convert the importance of the distinctive element of a social problem as an academic integrity issue was the wrong way to go. So, but the spirit of your question is, but I come from that perspective. I mean, I'm going to plant to you, if you will, that perspective. And I would say that mobilization and, the term you used, mobilization and?
I said inequality and oppression.
I'm sorry, thank you. Inequality and repression to me is oppression. I'll try it again. Inequality and oppression. Okay, I like oppression. Inequality, I really like. The point is that the two come together in this question of mobilization. Because the contradiction with the larger political economy is like a generator. It's like when you walk across that rug on that cold winter night, it's like no matter how you think about it, the sparks start to fly. And those sparks could go into a particular coherent direction, or they could just sort of, kind of jolt you at the moment you weren't expecting. But if you understand how it works, you can avoid how not to give your lover a shock on the nose. So you can discharge. The question is to understand how that connection makes the sort of, if you will, how it makes the connection in a structural way. It dictates the limits. How to avoid sparking yourself becomes an analysis of, again, the field, the larger field. So now, again, inequality, and if you will, as a fundamental element, obviously Marxism, the question of social class inequality, and the larger context of inequality that builds around that, is a driving force. The question is, I think you're raising a question to me, which is a sort of tool, kind of like how is it, social problems. Okay, as I think the constructionist perspective attempts to define, is a question of, when does that become a kind of, if you will, a collective shared subjectivity notion of a problematic condition? I may find my problematic condition, I may come to define my problematic condition nothing to do with what is killing me. And that is, it's a reality question. Again, the reality of the sparks. I may think the sparks may have something to do with the way I feel about it rather than, some kind of analysis of where static electricity comes from. So again, there's this question of subjectivity and consciousness, how to make a critical analysis. We can go into the epistemological debate. The point I'm trying to make is, the point is to change it. That's where I believe social constructionism doesn't fit the bill. It just doesn't match up to our expectations and our needs. So the question is, if we need to get there somehow, and that's where I'm suggesting we need to research. I don't, have an answer to the question in its entirety. I'm just suggesting the direction I think we ought to go. Thank you for your question, by the way. Okay,
Before we get to the awards, I think it's important in my last act as the program chair It's important to recognize the hard work of people who remain invisible. Michelle Kuntz and her administrative staff have been
we're going to go into awards mode, correct? So I'd like to ask Vice President Tracy Dietz to step forward.
Where is she?
Here you are.
I'm going to give you. I'll go fix the monitor.
Okay, so let's get happy and light and less boring. Okay, so I have to contradict that, of course. We have to, first of all, do our important cultural, sort of, commemoration of the year and of, the duty to honor the members of the profession who died in this last year. So it's not exactly happy and light. I'm sorry for going there. I now read my agenda. So the SSSP wishes to honor those members of the profession who did pass away this year. Herb Arbach, which is out in the back there. Stanley Cohen, James McCartney, Roxana Ng, Setsuso Matsununga Nishi, and Stephen Stefanak. Please let's have a moment of silent meditation. Okay, thank you. So, Tracy, why don't you step up, and we'd like to have the happy task now of announcing the winner of the Thomas C. Hood Social Action Raffle.
We are pleased to announce that the raffle winner for this year is Eric Bonds. Is he here?
Not present. I believe he was made aware of it.
Or I can keep it. It's for 2 complimentary nights stay at the Westin, New York, and Times Square. So
it's a lot of money.
And the next award will be the SSSP Student Paper Competition and Outstanding Scholarship Awards, and that will be presented by Shannon Monett, Council of Division Chairperson.
Woohoo! Awards! Yay! Let's get excited! My name is Shannon Monett. I'm the chair of the Council of Special Problems Divisions, and I am very happy to present the awards for all of the student paper awards and all of the other additional awards that the divisions give. So we're going to go through your program. If you have it with you, it's on page 59. I'm going to try to move quickly. And I would like to have everybody stand when your name is announced, but I would also ask you to hold your applause till the end if you can restrain yourselves, since we have a lot to go through. So for the Community Research and Development Division, the winner is Abigail Andrews for The Love of My Pueblo, explaining women's increased participation in migrant communities. And she is from the University of California at Berkeley. Is she here? Well, that's sad. Okay. For the Conflict, Social Action, and Change Division, we have Convincing People to Go Green, Managing Strategic Action by Minimizing Political Talk from Janet Lawrenson at Rutgers University. Hi, Janet. And by the way, last I knew, Janet was in the job market, so you should hire her. And the first runner-up for the Conflict, Social Action, and Change Division is Be a Good Shopper or Shop for Good, Non-Monetary Costs of Socially Responsible Purchasing from Ethan Schulman at the University of Michigan. Okay. From the Crime and Juvenile Delinquency Division, the winner is The Social Logic of Recidivism, Cultural Capital from Prison to the Street, Liam Martin from Boston College. Boston College? As long as I'm not a Red Sox fan. Honorable mention, disempowered rehabilitation, governing through alternative practices and therapeutic interventions at a women's reentry center from Colleen Hackett, University of Colorado at Boulder. And the Lifetime Achievement Award goes to Jack Levin at Northeastern University. Is Jack here? Well, if you see him, congratulate him. For the Disabilities Division, the winner goes to Wheelchair Ramps in Cyberspace, the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Internet, to Trevor Crowley, Brigham Young University. We need to get student paper award winners here. What is going on? Drinking and Drugs Division, the winner of the Bruce D. Johnson Award, Bad Apples, Recovery Narratives and Deviance in Methadone Maintenance Treatment, David Frank at the CUNY Graduate Center. Yay! Woo. Educational Problems Division. The winner is A New Look at the Experiential Core of College Life, Unveiling Sources of Persistent Inequality in American Higher Education, Lauren Schude, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Environment and Technology Division. The winner of the Brent K. Marshall Award is Sustainable Lifestyles and Environmental Activism, How Lifestyle Change Supports Collective Action. Again, Janet Lawrenson. Wow, you're like the superstar here today. Hire this girl. For the Family Division, When Sons Become Fathers, Examining Patterns of Fathering Across Generations, Christina Diaz, University of Wisconsin. I saw her earlier. She's here. Yeah, you should get an award for coming. For the Global Division Critical Sociology Graduate Student Paper Award, the winner is The High Price of Freedom, the Transnational Moral Economy of Low-Wage Women's Work in the Anti-Human Trafficking Movement, Alana Shi, University of California at Los Angeles. Oh, she's here too. Honorable mention goes to Migrant Workers and Labor Markets Gone Global, English Language Capital and the Production of Global Hierarchies, Geraldina Polanco and Sarah Zell, University of British Columbia. Global Division Outstanding Book Award. The key is here to be a member of the Global Division. They give lots of awards. The winner is We Are in This Dance Together, Gender, Power, and Globalization at a Mexican Garment Firm, Nancy Planke Videla, Rutgers University Press, 2012. Honorable mention goes to City of Extremes, the Spatial Politics of Johannesburg. That's Martin Murray from Durham, Duke University Press, 2011. From the Health Policy and Health Services Division, the winner of the Student Paper Award is Constructing Uncertainty, Constructing Skill, Creating New Forms of Medical Expertise Through Nurse Practitioner Narrative Practices, LaTanya Trotter, Princeton University. Yay! And the honorable mention goes to Beyond Access, Social Networks and the Use of Free Healthcare Services, Kathleen Oberlin and Oren Pismoni-Levy, Indiana University, Bloomington. From the Institutional Ethnography Division, the winner of the George W. Smith Award, Towards an Institutional Counter-Cartography of Nurses' Wound Work, Nicola Waters, University of Calgary. The Doris E. Smith Award for Scholar Activism goes to Roxana Ng, University of Toronto. The Labor Studies Division, the winner of the Harry Braveman Award, Making the Intern Economy, Role and Career Challenges of the Music Industry, intern Alexander Frenette, City University of New York Graduate Center. He's here. It's easy to get here, take the train, right? Law and Society Division, the winner of the Alfred L. Lingsmith Award, States of Inequality, How Local Immigration Regimes Shape Migrants Agency, Abigail Andrews, University of California, Berkeley. You've been standing for a long time. The Lifetime Achievement Award for the Law and Society Division goes to Richard Leo, University of San Francisco. The Student Paper Award winner for Society and Mental Health Division goes to Social Support and Health, the role of ethnicity and nativity among Black Americans, Christy Irving, Indiana University, Bloomington. Congratulations. The James R. Greeley Award for Distinguished Contributions to the Sociology of Mental Health goes to Peggy Thoits, Indiana University, Bloomington. The Poverty Class and Inequality Division Paper Award goes to Post-Recession, Governmentalities, Neoliberalism, Job Searching, and Comparative Control in Minneapolis, Madison Van Ort, University of Minnesota. Yay, she's here. And the Michael Harrington Award goes to Julie Andrzejewski, Social Responsibility Program, St. Cloud State University, and I apologize if I totally butchered that name. The Racial and Ethnic Minorities Division Student Paper Award winner goes to Jim Crow in Jail, Race as a Mechanism of Social Control in a Penal Institution, Michael Lawrence Walker, University of California at Riverside. Honorable mention goes to Creating a Shanghainese Ethnicity, How a Regional Difference Accelerated into an Ethnic Difference, Feng Zhu, Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Sexual Behavior, Politics, and Communities Division winner is the Sexual Double Standard, Sexual Relationship Context, and Adolescent Mental Health, Bryant Stoller, the Ohio State University. Social Problems Theory Division, the Textual Mediation of Denial, Congress, Abu Ghraib, and the Construction of an Isolated Incident, Jared Del Rosso, University of Denver. And by the way, that paper was also published in Social Problems in 2011. Sociology and Social Welfare Division, Revising the Welfare Queen, Calling for a New Approach to Welfare Analysis, Nicole Deanna, University of Albany, SUNY, my alma mater, by the way. Yay, woo, go SUNY Albany. Sport, Leisure, and the Body Division, the winner is Shining Stars, Blindsides, and Real Realities, Exit Rituals, Eulogy Work, and Allegories in Reality Television, Lisa Jo Vanenscott, Claire Forsty, and Savina Balsubramanian, Northwestern University. And Lisa Jo is actually the chair of the Environment Division of SSSP. That's great. And finally, Youth Aging in the Life Course Division, the winner is Breaking the Patterns, Youth Authority in the Wisconsin Uprising, Matthew Kearney, University of Wisconsin at Madison. So thank you to all of you who could be here. Please congratulate our award winners.
And someone who put a lot of work into this year, as we've heard, Shannon is just the chair, council division chairperson. It's just an amazingly complex task, and we're so grateful for her work this year. We have next on tap the 2013 Racial Ethnic Minority Graduate Scholarship winner, compañero Alfonso Latoni. Adelante.
Okay, thank you. So, all right, good evening. So according to SSSP rules, I only have 3 minutes to do this, and I've already taken 10 seconds to do this. So, but please give me another 30 seconds. It was a very cold fall of 1980 when I was in search of a doctoral program in sociology and economics, progressive, and I was just coming out of a master's program from a Jesuit university. So I had this Jesuit professor who tells me, you know what, we don't have a doctoral program in here, and what you want, you are a little too radical. There's this program up in Boston College, and I'm like, another Jesuit university. But you know, you want to check there, call Professor Severin Bruin, who may welcome you and talk to you about this program. So I go up there. I don't only call him, I go up to Boston, and this Professor Severin Bruin says to me, you know, you would fit well here because there are 2 graduate students here that are doing the same work that you want to do. One of them is Richard Dello, and the other one is James Arthur Galise. So these 2 are just, you would fit well. So, and then I look at the faculty and I see Peter Berger is there. I'm like, yes, I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to clobber Peter Berger. So good, I apply to the program, I'm admitted into the program, good enough. I get, see, Severin Bruin didn't tell me that Richard Dello Buono was part of a movement to oust Peter Berger. So I start there, and then I'm there, I'm admitted, I go there, there's no Peter Berger, but there's Richard Dello Buono. So the rest, I'm happy to share with you with a bottle of Cabernet or whatever. So every year, so it's been, 30 somewhat years. And who can say that after 32, 33 years, you're standing at a podium with a former professor of yours, Stephen Fall, with a few graduate student colleagues of yours, after 30 years, Kate Stout, Richard Dello Buono. This is just wonderful. So every year, the Society carries out a competition to grant a scholarship to a racial ethnic minority PhD graduate student who can show a commitment to scholarship but also to activism. And we have been doing this. SSSP has been doing this for many years. And I had the honor to chair the committee this year, and we had 18 wonderful competitive, candidates who submitted applications, who competed for the scholarship. And the committee only wished that we could award 18 $12,000 a year scholarships, because all 18 candidates were just wonderful. But we had to choose one. Many emails, many back and forth, many voting, many discussions, but one emerged. And that one that emerged had the consensus of the full committee. All 8 members agreed in their votings, in their tally, in their scores, that Fernando Cortés Chirino. Fernando, are you in the audience? Fernando, stand up, please. Fernando Cortés Chirino. Fernando from the University of California, Irvine, emerged as the winner. And I know your research, I had to evaluate your research, but I would rather have you share with us what's it all about. But before that, there was also an honorable mention. We had an honorable scholar mention. There was a second candidate who came very, very close to Fernando, and who is also from the Department of Sociology at the University of California, Irvine. So the 2 top were from the same department, and that is Edelina Muñoz Baerga. I don't know if Edelina is with us, but she receives an honorable scholar mention. So Fernando, please come to the podium. Like very good capitalists, we don't have a check for you. You will receive, but we don't have it here. So, but you will receive your award. So please welcome Fernando.
Hi, I didn't actually prepare anything because I didn't know we were going that direction, but I come from a department that's known sort of for 2 major things, or at least whenever I go around and talk to people. One of them is networks, and the other is social movements. And in my dissertation, what I'm looking at is, or I'm trying to, how vernacular can I get? Very? So I wanted to put my foot in the ass of social movements scholarship for completely leaving out political economy in the construction of everything from social movement organizations to the repertoires and how those are constrained by existing class relations. And that's not stuff that gets talked about all that often in those circles. And so I'm looking at political mass strikes and general strikes. And even though it's especially salient today because of what's going on around the world, but there's a sort of secret history that goes back 110 years, and most of that history doesn't actually take place in the United States or Western Europe. And so that's sort of what I'm looking at.
Wow. So let's see. Next on the agenda, the 2013 Joseph B. Gittler Award was not issued this year. So we'll move on, and I would like to ask Barbara Katz-Rothman to come on up for the 2013 Thomas E. Hood Social Action Award winner.
The Social Action Award is given in honor or to respect and appreciate whatever city it is that we're in. And in New York, whoa, a lot of competition for it. We have many, many, many local organizations doing wonderful work. The award is named in honor of Tom Hood, who was our previous executive director. And for those of you who may or may not know Tom Hood, among other things he did, he hired Michelle Smith Coons. And honest to God, is there anything else you need to do to justify a career? So the award is named after Tom Hood, and it represents what SSSP is, which is both an academic and an activist organization. I was very happy to chair this, and I was flipping ecstatic to oversee the process in which the award was chosen to be given to the Drug Policy Alliance of New York, which works to promote sensible drug policies, which is a hard concept to imagine, especially when you've had several glasses of wine, and to build a movement to end the drug war. I am absolutely over the top ecstatic that the person who represents the work, please come up, of the Drug Policy Alliance is one of ours, and very specifically one of mine, Julie Netherland, who is a sociologist, whose dissertation was on the social construction of buprenorphine, and a CUNY graduate, I say so. And so on behalf, please come up, on behalf of SSSP, I give you this small token of our appreciation.
Thank you. And on behalf of the Drug Policy Alliance, I'm thrilled to accept the award and to accept this monetary support for our work, and encourage you all to continue the great tradition of social action and scholarship that I know SSSP is known for. And this will go a long way towards supporting our efforts, in particular to end, expose and to combat racially biased policing here in New York City. So thank you very much. And
his name. The 2013 Beth B. Hess Memorial Scholarship winner and honorable mention will be presented by Nancy Naples, SWS, and SSSP past president.
I am living in a parallel universe. This minute left from SWS where we presented the Best Hess Award to these phenomenal young scholars who are still receiving their award over there on the east side of town. But I am so glad to be able to do this because I love SSSP and I'm back here. Okay, deep breath, $15 cab ride later. Okay, so here we go. I love Beth Hess. I mean, I miss her so much, and every time I come to SWS or SSSP, I think about her, sort of the amazing kind of feminist spirit that she carried forward. And this memorial scholarship is truly a wonderful thing that we're giving. It's given annually to a graduate student in sociology who began her or his college career at a 2-year community college or technical college. Each year, the award committee is faced with the daunting task. I mean, it's amazing how many of our colleagues have actually gotten through to the PhD through the community college system. And so we are sort of kind of honoring that history. This year's committee consisted of Denise Coppleton, who is like the most amazing chair ever, who actually wrote this. So can't really claim too much autonomous authorship here, but the committee this year included Myra Marks-Ferry, Sarah Bruch, who is also a former awardee, and myself. We had an amazingly difficult time. It's incredible how many of our students are actually, coming to us through the community college system. Each possessed qualities that Beth embodied, including excellent scholarship and overall academic potential, especially in the areas of gender and social inequality, and a commitment to teaching, mentoring, and social activism, especially in a community college setting. This year's high-quality applicants led us to select one honorable mention in addition to our scholarship winner. Each honorable mention winner receives complimentary membership in Sociologists for Women in Society and registration and banquet tickets for the SWS and, well, not this year, but SSSP, when you have banquets, would also be providing that to them. And the ASA summer meetings here in New York City. Our honorable mention award goes to Jessica Dunning-Lozana, a PhD candidate at the University of Texas, Austin, a graduate of a continuation high school. Jessica later attended Laney Community College in Oakland, California. Her dissertation is an ethnographic study of a disciplinary alternative education program in Texas. These programs are designed to isolate, discipline, and reintegrate students back into mainstream classrooms, and Jessica's research explores precisely how this punitive and remediating process unfolds. The 2013 scholarship carries a stipend of $15,000, so hey, this is really an important award, and travel support of $300 from SSSP to be used to support the pursuit of graduate studies, as well as a 1-year student membership in SWS and SSSP. Additionally, the winner receives complimentary registration and reception and banquet tickets for the summer meetings of SSSP, SWS, and ASA. Whew. Hopefully they'll get connected to SSSP. They'll never leave. We are delighted to award the 2013 Beth Hess Memorial Scholarship to Anna Sorensen, a PhD candidate in sociology at UC Santa Barbara. Anna briefly attended SUNY Potsdam before a divorce and custody battle led her to California. She resumed her college career at Community College before transferring to Cal State University Chico. Her undergraduate sociology courses demonstrated how our personal troubles were connected to larger structural issues, and her work tutoring other students at Boot Community College led Anna to see the liberatory potential of teaching. She explains in her application letter, and I quote, "Without access to teachers at a community college who purposely helped me remediate my academic weaknesses and discover my abilities, I would not have made my way to a 4-year institution and found mentors who pushed me to achieve possibilities I did not know existed." Anna's academic interests focus on social movements, gender, and sexuality. Her dissertation examines the California same-sex marriage movement's failure to stop Proposition 8 and how this failure changed activist strategies and led to the creation of new collective identities. Anna has successfully blended her own movement activism with her academic studies of it, effectively demonstrated the potential of public sociology for outstanding research and activism. We are pleased to recognize Anna as the 2013 Beth Hess Memorial Scholarship recipient, and she regrets that She didn't take a cab with me over here. She literally was on the stage receiving her accolades from SWS, and so therefore I'm here in her stead, and we are very proud of our two awardees tonight. Thank you so much.
The 2013 Lee Founders Award winner will be presented by Heather Dalmage, committee member.
Hi. On behalf of the SSSP Board of Directors and the 2013 Lee Founders Award Committee, I am pleased to present this year's award to Professor Kathleen Ferraro. The Lee Founders Award was established in 1981 to recognize significant achievements over a distinguished career that demonstrate commitment to the ideals of SSSP founders Alfred McClung and Elizabeth Lee. The nominee must have been actively contributing member to the Society over the course of her career and demonstrate significant achievement in scholarship, teaching, service, in ways that promote social justice and the betterment of human life. This year's award recipient exemplifies achievements in all of these realms. Kathleen Ferraro is a highly recognized scholar in the fields of domestic violence, gender sociology, and homelessness. She is a pioneering feminist sociologist and criminologist who is also recognized as a fine teacher, a mentor, and community activist working to promote social justice. Her 34-plus scholarly articles and chapters have appeared in top journals, crim journals and sociology journals, as well as anthologies. Her scholarship is wide-ranging and includes conceptually innovative pieces notable not only for their contribution to her substantive interests, but also for their methodological innovations in qualitative research from a feminist perspective. Her work also provides important insights for redesign of social policy so as to promote social justice. Her activism is equally wide-ranging. She has been a founding member of Board of Directors of women's shelters, support centers for homeless women. She is frequently unpaid for consultant for these causes, including the work with local Indian community services for domestic violence survivors in Arizona. She's a public speaker and commentator, and she generously shares her expertise with the community. She's an award-winning teacher and has worked with many graduate students both at ASU and now at NAU, her current academic home. She has helped train resident hall workers about rape and intimate partner violence and has directed numerous theses and dissertation projects. She is a past president of our society, and she's provided endless service to SSSP. I am so pleased to be able to present the Lee Founders Award to Kathleen Ferraro tonight. And on behalf of the Society, we thank you and congratulate you.
It's so late, and I won't say very much, except I've wanted to win this award for about 30 years. All the people who have received this award before me are my heroes and sheroes, and I respect all of them so much, and all of you so much. There's so many other people who could have received this award tonight, so thank you so much for this great honor and for staying to see me get it. Really appreciate it.
And now we have the 2012 C. Wright Mills Award winner presentation. Raven Michalowski, sorry. Would you please come forward? Hello. Whoa. Tied tongue.
Okay, I'm the guy you've been waiting for because I'm the last person. The C. Wright Mills Award honors a piece of scholarship that is clearly in the tradition of Mills, in the critical tradition of Mills. Before I move to the award, I do want to recognize the members of the committee because this is an enormous undertaking where we ask people who already have way too much to do to read an enormous number of books. So the members of the committee are in alphabetical order. Oops, I get that wrong. Let me flip it over. Okay. They are Antonio Gonzalez Prendes from Wayne State University, Harry Doms, University of Tennessee, Corey Dolgan, Stonehill College, Shannon Bonnet from Pennsylvania State University, Gretchen Purser, Syracuse University, Victor Rios from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and Ronnie Steinberg from Vanderbilt University. These people worked long and hard and conscientiously. This year, the C. Wright Mills Committee had to review a total of 66 books. The vast majority of those books were of high quality. It becomes a very, very difficult task to decide which of those books will enter into the list of the 5 candidates for the top award. But even to be selected among the top 5 is a remarkable honor. And so I want to read again in alphabetical order the names of the authors and the titles of those books. We can only pick one winner. Any one of these could have been a winner. It was a very, very difficult task. And I urge you all to perhaps take a look at these books. Every one of them are remarkable. First off is David Cunningham, Klansville, USA, The Rise and Fall of Civil Rights Era Ku Klux Klan by Oxford University Press. And David, if you were here, please stand up. I don't know how many of the finalists are here. Number 2 was Sybil Fox for 3 Worlds of Relief, Race, Immigration, and the American Welfare State from the Progressive Era to the New Deal, Princeton University Press. And Sybil, are you here? Matthew Huey for Whitebound, Nationalist, Anti-Racist, and the Shared Meaning of Race, Stanford University Press. Alondra Nelson, Body and Soul, the Black Panther Party and the Fight Against Medical Discrimination from the University of Minnesota Press. And finally, Susan Crawford, Living Faith, Everyday Religion and Mothers in Poverty, University of Chicago Press. It is my great honor to announce that the winner for this year's C. Wright Mills Award is Sybil Fox for 3 Worlds of Relief. Before Sybil comes up here, I'd just like to say a few words about this book as we all came to know and understand this book. 3 Worlds of Relief is an important piece of historical sociology. It compares the treatment of Europeans, blacks, and Mexicans during both the Progressive and New Deal eras in terms of, and by Europeans I mean European immigrants, Mexicans and blacks, in their receipt of social services, either private or public social services. She uncovers the ways in which and the reasons why European non-citizens fared far better in terms of relief than Mexicans, and both Europeans and Mexicans fared better than African Americans. This is, however, not simply historical commentary. It offers a profound challenge to the current national imaginary in which European immigrants bootstrap themselves into the American dream with little public or private assistance. Given the current debates over the so-called immigration reform, 3 Worlds of Relief could hardly be more relevant. Giving this award, however, feels a bit like carrying coals to Newcastle. Three Worlds of Relief has already been given awards by 2 divisions at that other organization meeting in town this week, and by a division of the American Political Science Association. However, tonight, Three Worlds of Relief and Sybil Fox received the highest honor, scholarly honor, from the SSSP. Would you please join us? I would like to note that this award also comes with a cash stipend as well as this lovely plaque. So here's this, and here's the plaque.
I am thrilled beyond measure to get this award, and I want to thank the SSSP and especially the selection committee. It's a tremendous honor just to have been chosen as a finalist alongside the other amazing scholars for this award. I just want to say that I wrote this book in an attempt to try to reframe the debate about immigrants and public benefits. And given the tenor of the debate in Washington today, my work, our work, is clearly not yet done. So I want to dedicate this award to those who are on the front lines of this struggle, the scholars, the activists, and the scholar activists who are fighting for dignity, for fair treatment, and for justice. And I am in awe of their bravery, their determination, and the great sacrifices that they've made. Thank you.
We're fresh out of awards, but thank you very much for hanging in there. Sorry I went over time, but it seems like we ended up fairly around time. So have a good evening. It's a big city. Be careful, but it's worth it. It's worth it.